For generations, the GI Bill has been this incredible symbol of the American dream for veterans. It's a promise, right? A promise of education, opportunity, a real path forward after you've served.
But what happens when that promise feels a little bit broken? What happens when the heroes from one war get parades, and the heroes of the very next one come home to silence? That's the story we're diving into. All right, so first things first, let's set the stage. To really get this, you have to understand the original promise. Because after World War II, the GI Bill didn't just help out some vets, it literally changed the entire country.
Its official name was the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. And yeah, sure, part of the goal was to avoid massive unemployment after the war. But what it actually did, with its education benefits, was spark an absolute revolution in American higher education.
I mean, the scale here is just mind-blowing. Over 2.2 million World War II vets went to college because of this bill. Get this, by 1947, veterans made up nearly half of all college students in the entire country. This wasn't some small program, it was a societal tidal wave.
And you can really feel that shift in descriptions from back then. All of a sudden, college campuses, which had pretty much been for young, wealthy kids, were just flooded with older, married veterans and their families. They were living in trailers right on campus. This quote about diapers hanging from the trees says it all. The whole culture changed overnight.
So the GI Bill set this incredibly powerful standard. It became the benchmark. It was the expected reward for your service, a solid promise of a better future if you risked everything for your country.
Okay, so now we get to see how that promise held up. Or, well, how it started to fray around the edges. Because just 5 years later, a new generation of veterans came home to a totally different world. The Korean War starts in 1950. It was an incredibly brutal, exhausting conflict, fought in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. But the America these veterans returned to, it just wasn't the same country that had thrown all those parties at the end of World War II. And the difference is just jarring. World War II vets came home as the greatest generation, right? They got ticker tape parades and massive public support. The Korean War, though, it almost immediately got stuck with the nickname the Forgotten War. It ended in a frustrating stalemate, and its veterans came home not to celebrations but to public indifference. Just quiet.
And this isn't just a feeling, the data really shows it. When you ask them, did you feel appreciated when you came home? 70% of World War II vets say yes. But for Korean War vets, that number drops to just 33%. That is a massive gap in the national mood, and it had very real consequences.
The promise itself was actually changed. The GI Bill for Korean War vets was just less generous. The money went to the veteran instead of the school, which meant they had to manage it all. The extra money for living expenses? Gone. And they got a full year less of benefits. So not only did they get a colder welcome, the actual support they were promised was weaker too.
But the challenges they faced went way beyond public opinion and money. These vets were carrying invisible wounds from a horrific war at a time when the world didn't even have the right words to describe them.
The psychological toll of the Korean War was just immense. Soldiers were dealing with extreme cold, constant guerrilla attacks, and front lines that shifted constantly. But when they came home, the medical community really had a very limited understanding of what was going on inside their heads.
The term they used for it back then was combat fatigue. And just look at what that means. It was seen as this temporary condition, something you could just get over. The whole focus wasn't on long-term healing for the soldier. It was about getting them back to the front line as quickly as humanly possible.
This timeline really shows you how long it took for us to figure this out. We went from shell shock in World War I to combat fatigue in Korea, and it wasn't until 1980, after the Vietnam War, that post-traumatic stress disorder finally became an official, recognized diagnosis. That's nearly 30 years after the Korean War ended.
So what was the result of all that? Well, it meant that for a whole generation of veterans, there was no diagnosis, no real plan for treatment, and this cultural pressure to just be stoic and tough it out. They were left to struggle with these deep, lasting wounds completely on their own.
So this brings us to today. And now there's a new fight going on. It's a fight against time itself, to make sure the stories and the struggles of this forgotten generation finally get the attention they deserve.
Just look at these numbers. They're pretty stark. The number of living Korean War veterans is dropping fast. By 2030, we're looking at fewer than 200,000 of them left. The window to hear these stories from the people who actually live them, it's closing.
But as this generation gets older, a new one is stepping up to the plate.
Their kids, their grandkids, historians, advocates, they're all working like crazy to collect these oral histories and preserve this legacy before it's too late.
And as the grandson of a veteran said so perfectly, the legacy doesn't end when the hero passes away. It's a torch that gets passed to the next generation. It becomes their duty to keep telling the story.
And it's so important to remember just how many incredible people were part of this generation. I mean, you might not even realize it, but we're talking about astronauts like Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, the first two guys to walk on the moon, Oscar winners like Michael Caine, political legends like Charles Ranger, and sports icons like Ted Williams. They all served in this forgotten war and then came home to shape our world.
When it's all said and done, their legacy is really one of incredible resilience. Not just the resilience it took to survive the battlefield in one of the 20th century's most brutal wars, but the resilience to survive the long, quiet decades of being forgotten and misunderstood that came after.
Which leaves us with a really big, important question. They were forgotten once when they came home. The challenge for all of us now is, how do we make sure a generation is never forgotten twice?